From the very beginning of our lives, we start building something we call the self. But this self is not what you think it is. It is crafted out of expectations, shaped by our parents, molded by society, refined by fear, and reinforced by the need to belong. We create a version of ourselves that helps us function in the world. This version has a name, a history, opinions, achievements, and even wounds that we identify with so deeply that we forget it's not who we truly are. This is what people call the ego, and while it serves a purpose in our early development, it becomes a prison as we grow older. You see, the ego is not your soul. It is merely the mask you wear, the costume stitched together by survival. It wants to keep you safe, yes, but at what cost? The ego thrives on control, on certainty, on identity. But the soul doesn't seek safety. The soul seeks truth, expansion, depth, and transformation. And so long as the ego is in charge, there is no room for that sacred voice within to rise. That is why we begin to feel lost, even when we're successful, why we feel empty, even when surrounded by praise. It is the soul knocking, asking you to look beyond the surface, beyond the labels, beyond the story you've been telling yourself. The greatest illusion is not the world outside of you, it is the identity you cling to inside of you. Because you have confused the mask with the face, the role with the essence. You have come to believe you are the thoughts in your mind, the pain in your past, or the image in the mirror. But none of that is you. The truth is deeper, quieter, hidden beneath the noise of who you've been told to be. And unless you're willing to question this image, to challenge what you think is real, you will never taste the fullness of your being. The ego is not the enemy. It is simply not the end. You were never meant to live and die as a mask. You were meant to remember the face beneath it. No one invites suffering into their life, and yet it arrives with perfect timing, when the soul is ready to grow but the ego refuses to let go. We often perceive suffering as something gone wrong, as a punishment or misfortune. But in truth, atomization, suffering is one of the few things powerful enough to shake the foundations of the ego. It enters when we've grown too comfortable in our illusions, too dependent on the identity we've built, and it cracks the surface of everything we once thought was solid. When life no longer reflects the version of reality the ego has constructed, we are thrown into confusion, heartbreak, despair. And yet, within that darkness, something sacred begins. It is in the breakdown of certainty that something new has the chance to emerge. The pain itself becomes the doorway, not because it is pleasant, not because it is wanted, but because it forces us to confront the false walls we've built around ourselves. In this confrontation, the ego begins to lose its grip, and while that collapse can feel terrifying, it is actually grace in disguise. Atomization. The truth is, transformation never happens when we're in control. The ego will never voluntarily dissolve. It has to be broken open. And life, in its mysterious intelligence, knows exactly how to do that. Whether it's the loss of a relationship, the failure of a dream, or the quiet age of emptiness in the middle of success, suffering becomes the great revealer. It shows us what is real, what is essential, and what was merely decoration on the surface of our identity. What most people call a breakdown is often the beginning of a spiritual breakthrough. But it cannot be rushed. It must be lived, felt, surrendered to. The old identity must be allowed to die without knowing what will take its place. And that takes immense courage. Yet without that death, the soul cannot truly be born. The path to freedom often begins in the moment everything falls apart. When the ego begins to dissolve, something long hidden starts to rise to the surface. The shadow. It is not some external force or dark entity, but the very parts of ourselves we have denied, rejected, or buried. These are not inherently evil aspects, but simply pieces of our wholeness we've deemed unacceptable because they didn't fit the image we were trying to protect. The ego clings to a polished version of who we are, and anything that threatens to disturb that picture gets pushed into the unconscious. But the shadow never disappears, it waits. As the identity we've built begins to crumble, the walls that held the shadow back start to weaken. And when the shadow emerges, it often does so in unsettling ways, in irrational anger, in sudden envy, in fear we can't explain. But this is not a sign of regression. It is a sign of awakening. What has been hidden must be brought into the light. We cannot claim our full power while pretending certain parts of us do not exist. We cannot become whole if we only accept the parts we find lovable. The process of confronting the shadow is uncomfortable. It challenges everything the ego wanted to be. But there is great wisdom in the shadow. It holds our authenticity, our creativity, our wildness, even our compassion. What appears frightening at first is often simply misunderstood. The shadow is not the enemy of the soul. It is the forgotten sibling, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be integrated. And so, this inner meeting becomes a necessary part of transformation. If we are to truly transcend the ego, we must first embrace all that it tried to hide. Not with shame, not with guilt, but with honest reflection and courage. Only then can we move beyond a divided self. Only then can the soul speak without distortion. To find the light within, one must first make peace with the darkness they carry. There comes a point on the inner journey where all the identities we once clung to begin to slip away. Not because we no longer care, but because something deeper within us begins to stir, something that no longer fits within the tight frame of who we believed we were. When you release the need to be seen a certain way, to hold a particular role, to live up to someone else's definition of success or goodness, you begin to make space. And that space, though unfamiliar, is sacred. It is in this emptiness that the soul finally finds room to breathe. Most people fear this stage. They fear the unknown, the silence, the loss of labels. They fear not being able to say, "This is who I am." But what if that uncertainty is not emptiness, but clarity in disguise? What if letting go of identity is not a loss, but a return? You see, the soul does not speak in titles or roles. It does not identify as the job, the reputation, the family name, or the persona we've shown the world. The soul speaks in silence, in presence, in the quiet stirrings of truth that arise when we are no longer performing. When the ego steps aside, what remains is something much more authentic, much more ancient. A knowing that does not come from the mind, but from being itself. You begin to see yourself not as someone who needs to become, but as someone who already is. And this awareness has nothing to prove. It does not shout. It does not chase. It simply is. And in that stillness, it becomes unmistakable. In losing the rigid identity we once depended on, we rediscover a part of ourselves that never needed to be created because it was always there, waiting, watching, patiently allowing us to exhaust every illusion before revealing itself. That is the soul, not something you have to find out there, but something that awakens when you stop pretending in here. To truly hear the voice of your soul, you must be willing to fall into the silence left behind when identity dissolves. There is a moment in every deep transformation where the old self simply cannot continue. No matter how hard you try to go back to rebuild the image you once relied on, it no longer fits. It begins to feel hollow, like a costume worn too long. And in that space between what has ended and what has not yet begun, you face the most sacred threshold of all, the death of who you thought you were. This is not the death of the body. It is the death of identity, the dissolving of the story that once gave you meaning, but now only restricts you. It can feel disorienting, even terrifying, to watch everything familiar fall away. But what dies in this process is not your truth. It's the illusion. It's the version of yourself built from fear, from survival, from the need to please and perform. And just as a seed must break to release new life, atomization, your old identity must be allowed to shatter for something greater to emerge. This is the beginning of rebirth. Not a surface level change, but a complete reordering of your inner world. You no longer move through life according to the script given to you. You begin to feel your own rhythm, your own center, and that changes everything. What once seemed important now feels empty. What once terrified you now draws you forward. Because from this space of surrender something timeless begins to rise. Rebirth is not a dramatic explosion. It is often quiet, almost invisible to the outside world. But internally it is the most profound shift you will ever experience. You move from being shaped by the world to being guided by your essence. You are no longer playing a role. You are embodying a presence. And it isn't something you create, it's something you allow. It's already there, buried beneath all the layers you had to lose. True awakening is not adding more to yourself, it's letting go. Again and again until only the real remains. The moment you step beyond the ego, something extraordinary happens. Freedom begins. Not the kind of freedom the ego chases, which is always conditional, always earned, always fragile. But a deeper freedom, a freedom that comes when you are no longer imprisoned by your own image, no longer performing for the world's approval, no longer afraid of being unseen. You start to live not from fear, but from truth, and truth, by its nature, liberates. As long as the ego rules your life, everything you do is filtered through comparison, insecurity, and the need to be something more. Even your successes feel empty because they were never truly yours. They belong to the mask. But once the mask drops, and you no longer need to be anything but what you are, you experience a clarity that no external validation can offer. You no longer chase meaning, you carry it within you. This is where life begins to flow differently. You stop asking, what should I do to be loved? And instead ask, what is love asking me to do? You're no longer trapped in the endless cycle of achievement and disappointment. You're not trying to win at life. You are simply present in it. And that presence itself becomes power. Not power over others, but power within yourself, a grounded, unwavering knowing that no role, no failure, no praise or rejection can touch. This inner freedom is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply transforms the way you walk through the world. You speak less, but with more depth. You do less, but with more purpose. You need less, but give more. Because everything you thought you had to strive for, you now realize was always waiting within you. And you no longer live by force, you live by alignment. This is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of a different one. A life led by soul, not ego. A life that unfolds from the inside out. A life where you are no longer becoming someone, but simply being who you've always been underneath it all. Real peace begins the moment you stop trying to become and start remembering who you already are.